All right, page 82. After the misleading through the water of Jordan had been removed from line 25, I strengthened Moses remained. Well, who did strengthen Moses, and where was the strengthening done? I remember that Moses was strengthened at the close of his battle with the Amalekites by having his hands held up by two companions. Where did this battle take place, and who were the strengtheners? It took place at Jehovah Nissi, close to the Mount of God, and the strengtheners were Aaron and Hur. So I could recompose the riddle as, I strengthened Moses in the land of the deity, and the answer was Aaron and Hur. If only one name was needed, it would probably be Hur, because this is the only action recorded of him in the Pentateuch. Similarly, in line 25, I have been with Mary Magdalene, had to be separated from the misleading in the firmament, and the other part of the riddle looked for in another verse. I had already found it by studying the list of people present at the crucifixion. St. Simon of Cyrene, St. John the Apostle, St. Veronica, Dismas the good thief, Gestas the bad thief, the centurion, the Virgin Mary, Mary Cleopas, Mary Magdalene. But I had not overlooked the woman who, according to the Protevangelion of St. James, was the first person ever to adore the child Jesus, the prime witness of his parthenogenesis and his most faithful follower. She is mentioned in Mark 15 as standing beside Mary Magdalene. So I was with Mary Magdalene at the place of the crucifixion of the merciful Son of God. The answer was Salom. Who instructed Enoch? Eli does not apparently belong to this riddle. I agree with Charles Burkitt, Osterley, Box, and other biblical scholars that nobody can hope to understand the sayings of Jesus who has not read the book of Enoch, omitted from the canon of the Apocrypha, but closely studied by the primitive Christians. I happen to have been reading the book and knew that the answer was Uriel, and that Uriel instructed Enoch on the fall of Lucifer into the depth of hell. A curious historical point is that the verse about Uriel's instruction of Enoch is not included in the fragments of the Greek book of Enoch quoted by the 9th century Byzantine historian Cencelius, nor in the Vatican MS 1809, nor in the quotations from the book of Enoch in the Epistle of St. Jude. It occurs only in the text dug up at Akhim in Egypt in 1886 and in the Ethiopian translation of the earlier Greek text, which is the only version which we know to have been extant in the 13th century. Where did Guion find the story? Was a knowledge of Ethiopian among his attainments? Or did he find a complete Greek manuscript in the library of some Irish abbey that had escaped the fury of the Vikings' war against books? The passage in the first book of Enoch, was it 18 and 19, 1, 2, 3, runs. And I saw a deep abyss and columns of heavenly fire, and among them I saw columns of fire falling, which were beyond measure, alike upwards and downwards. And Uriel said to me, Here shall stand the angels who have lain with women, and whose spirits, assuming many different forms, defile mankind and lead them astray into demonoltry and sacrificing to demons. Here shall they stand until the day of judgment, and the women whom they seduced shall become sirens. I, Enoch, alone saw this vision of the end of all things. No other shall see as far as I. This discovery took me a stage further to line 7. I have borne a banner before Alexander. Among the poems attributed to Taliesin in the Red Book of Hengist is a fragment called Why Gophusi Beard, a sketch of the world, which contains a short panegyric of the historical Alexander, and another, Anraphodanu Alexander, the Not Wanderers of Alexander, a joke at the expense of a 13th century Spanish romance ascribing to Alexander adventures properly belonging to the myth of Merlin, which tells mockingly how he went beneath the sea and met creatures of distinguished lineage among the fish. But neither of these poems gave me a clue to the riddle. If it must be taken literally, I should perhaps have guessed the answer to be Neoptolemus. Neoptolemus, who was one of Alexander's bodyguard and the first man to scale the walls of Gaza at the assault. But more probably, the reference was to Alexander as a reincarnation of Moses. According to Josephus, when Alexander came to Jerusalem at the outset of his eastern conquest, he refrained from sacking the temple but bowed down and adored the tetragrammaton on the high priest's golden frontlet. His astonished companion, Parmenio, asked why in the world he had behaved in this unkingly way. Alexander answered, I did not adore the high priest himself, but the God who has adorned him with office. The case is this, that I saw this very person in a dream dressed exactly as now while I was at Dios in Macedonia. In my dream, I was debating with myself how I might conquer Asia, and this man exhorted me not to delay. I was to pass boldly with my army across the narrow sea, for his God would march before me and help me to defeat the Persians. So I am now convinced that Jehovah is with me and will lead my armies to victory. The high priest then further encouraged Alexander by showing him the prophecy in the book of Daniel, which promised him the dominion of the east, and he went up to the temple, sacrificed to Jehovah, and made a generous peace treaty with the Jewish nation. The prophecy referred to Alexander as the two-horned king, and he subsequently pictured himself on his coins with two horns. He appeared in the Quran as Dhul Qarnayn, the two-horned. Moses was also two-horned, and in Arabian legend, El-Hidr, the ever-young prophet, a former sun hero of Sinai, befriended both Moses and Alexander at the meeting place of two seas. To the learned Guion, therefore, a banner borne before Alexander was equally a banner borne before Moses, and St. Jerome, or his Jewish mentors, had already made a poetic identification of Alexander's horns with those of Moses. The banner of Moses was Nehushtan, the brazen serpent, which he raised up to avert the plague in the wilderness. When he did so, he became an Alexander, i.e., a warder off of evil from man. So the answer of this riddle is Nehushtan, or in the Greek Septuagint spelling, in which I imagine Guion had read the story, Neestan. It should be remembered that this brazen serpent in the Gospel according to John 3:14 and the apocryphal epistle of Barnabas, 12 Greek number, I guess, is a type of Jesus Christ. Barnabas emphasizes that the serpent hung on a wooden thing, i.e. the cross, and had the power of making alive. In Numbers 21:9, it might have been 12:7, yeah. In Numbers 21:9, it is described as a seraph, a name given by Isaiah to the flying serpents that appeared in his vision as the attendants of the living God and flew to him with a live coal from the altar. The next riddle I had to solve, a combination of lines 9 and 26, was, I have been in the firmament on the galaxy. The galaxy, or Milky Way, is said to have been formed when the milk of the great goddess Rhea of Crete spouted abundantly into the sky after the birth of the infant Zeus. But since the great goddess's name varies from mythographer to mythographer, Hyginus, for example, debates whether to call her Juno or Opus, wealth. Guion has considerately given us another clue. When Roma was built, he is correctly identifying a Cretan with a Roman goddess, and what is more surprising, recognizes Romulus as a Latin deity of the same religious system as Cretan Zeus. Romulus's mother was also named Rhea, and if she had trouble with her milk when she was forced to wean her twins in order to conceal their birth, so had Cretan Rhea in the same circumstances. The main difference was that Romulus and Remus had a she-wolf for their foster mother, whereas Zeus, and some say his foster brother, Goat Pan, too, was suckled by the she-goat Amalthea, whose hide he afterwards wore as a coat, or, as still others say, by a white sow. Both Romulus and Zeus were brought up by shepherds, so I have been in the firmament on the galaxy when Roma was built. The answer is Rhea, though it was not Rhea herself, but the spurt of her milk, Rhea in Greek, that was on the galaxy. Guion had been anticipated by Nennius in giving more importance to Rhea, mother of Romulus, than the classical mythologists had done. Nennius called her the most holy queen. This riddle is purposely misleading. The only legend about the galaxy that Hannon and the other bards at Magelwin's court would have known concerns Bloodawed, conjured by Gwydion to be the bride of Lu Law Geifs. Lu's other name was Huan, and Bloodawed was transformed into an owl and called Twyll Huan, the deceiving of Wan, for having caused Lu's death, the Welsh for owl being Tilion. The legend of Bloodwed and the galaxy occurs in the Pennard MSS. Do I stop there? No. The wife of Huan Ap Don was a party to the killing of her husband and said that he had gone to hunt away from home. His father, Gwydion, the king of Gwynedd, traversed all countries in search of him and at last made Sar Gwydion, that is the Milky Way, as a track by which to seek his soul in the heavens, where he found it. In requital for the injury that she had done, he turned the young wife into a bird, and she fled from her father-in-law and is called to this day Twyll Hun. Thus the Britons formerly treated their stories and tales after the manner of the Greeks in order to keep them in memory. It should be added that the form Sire Gwydion instead of Sire Gwydion proves the myth to be a late one. Bloodwed, as shown in Chapter 2, was Olwen, she of white track, so Gwydion was right to search for her in the galaxy. Rhea, with her white track of stars, was the celestial counterpart to Olwen Bloodwed with her white track of trefoil, who, in line 21, witnessed the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot, or perhaps the unnamed wife of Lot, who, in line 18, was the chief director of the work of the Tower of Nimrod. I saw that the Lapwing was at her tricks again. The question really ran, of the work on what tower was Nimrod the chief director? The answer was Babel. Gower's lines on the inconvenience caused to Nimrod and his masons when the confusion of tongues began had run into my head for years. One called for stones, they brought him tiles, and Nimrod, that great champion, he raged like a young lion. Who, in line 24, was with my Lord in the manger of the ass, was the answer, swaddling clothes. Then someone called my attention to the text of Luke 2:16, and they came with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the babe laying in a manger. Guion was being mischievous. Literally, the sentence reads as though Joseph, Mary, and the child were all together in the manger. The answer was evidently Joseph, since that was St. Joseph's most glorious moment. Who was it that said in line 23, I am now come here to the remnant of Troia? According to Nennius, Sigbertus, Gamblesinus, Geoffrey of Monmouth, and others, Brutus, the grandson of Ennius, landed with the remnants of the Trojans at Totnes in Devon in the year 1074 BC, 109 years after the accepted date of the fall of Troy. A people who came over the Mortalk, the North Sea, some 7 centuries later to join them were the Cymri. They cherished the notion that they were descended from Gomer, son of Japhet, and had wandered all the way from Taprobane, Sicilian, see Triad 54, by way of Asia Minor before finally settling in Lido in North Britain. So, I have been in India and Asia, line 20, and am now come here to the remnant of Troia. The answer is Gomer. I know the names of the stars from north to south, and line 8 suggested one of the 3 happy astronomers of Britain mentioned in the Triads, and I judged from the sentence my original country is the region of the summer stars, i.e. the West, which seemed to belong to this riddle, that no Greek, Egyptian, Arabic, or a Babylonian astronomer was intended, Idris being the first named of the three astronomers. The answer was probably Idris. I have been on the White Hill in the courtyard of Cybele in line 29, evidently belonged with I was in the court of Dawn before the birth of Gwydion in line 12. The answer was Vron or Bron, whose head, after his death, was, according to the Romance of Bronwyn, buried on the White Hill, Tower Hill, at London as a protection against invasion, as the head of King Eurystheus of Mycenae was buried in a pass that commanded the approach to Athens, and the alleged head of Adam was buried at the northern approach to Jerusalem until King Arthur exhumed it. For Bran was a son of Danu, long before the coming of the Belgic Gwydion. How long's that been? About 15 minutes. I think that's good.